Is the evaluation of anime subjective or objective? This is an issue that seemingly everyone in the anime community has an opinion on, yet there's so much misinformation surrounding the discourse that it can be difficult to suss out the truth. In this video, I'm going to set the record straight. This is the ultimate guide to subjectivity and objectivity in anime evaluation. For many people, subjectivity is understood in terms of judgments influenced by personal feelings or opinions. Strictly speaking, this isn't wrong. However, because it's such a narrow understanding, it can often lead to confusion. A better way to understand subjectivity is as those things that relate to the subject or the individual, such as you or me. More precisely, we might say that subjective properties are mind-dependent. They exist only within the mind of a subject. This is the basis of the common definition, as personal feelings or opinions only exist in the mind of the individual who holds them, and thus they are subjective. So in short, to say something is subjective is to say that it exists exclusively in the mind. Let's now turn our focus to objectivity. For many, objectivity is reduced to those judgments that express facts. Much like with the common definition of subjectivity, this isn't technically wrong, but it is so narrow that it ends up being more confusing than helpful. Objectivity, properly understood, involves those things that are external to the subject. Objective properties, then, are those properties that exist independent of the mind. These would include the everyday objects of sense experience, such as the existence of an anime or manga, and in general, anything that exists independent of us thinking it is objective. Thus, to say something is objective is to say that it exists independent of any mind thinking it. Given these accounts of subjectivity and objectivity, the natural question arises, how does the evaluation of anime factor into this? In order to answer this question, we must first understand what exactly evaluation is. In evaluation, we take our experience of an anime and run it through a series of criteria. For example, we might look at the existence of character development or the pacing of the narrative. Now, in our minds, we've attached a certain value to these criteria. The existence of character development, for instance, is good, while the lack of it is bad. Or a fast-paced narrative is bad, while a more moderately paced narrative is good. We then see how our experience of the anime fares against these criteria. Once we have exhausted our criteria, we are left with a general sense of what the anime did well and what it did poorly. On that basis, we can judge the overall anime as good or bad. Given that outline of evaluation, we can begin to situate it within the objective-subjective debate. To begin, all evaluation has its basis in something objective. In particular, the sense data I receive from the screen as I watch an anime is objective. For instance, the fact that Naruto's on the screen right now is objective. The fact that he hit Mizuki is objective. The fact that Iruka is expressing a surprised look is objective. All of these things are happening regardless of if I look at the screen or not. However, this is the extent of objectivity in evaluation. The actual act of evaluation occurs entirely and exclusively in the mind of the subject. This largely has to do with the fact that the value of any criteria is established within the mind of the subject. Consider character development. There is no necessary connection between the existence of character development and the value good. Rather, its connection is entirely established in the mind of a subject, and only in the mind of a subject. Although many hold that character development is good, there are sound reasons for arguing otherwise. For example, the existence of a flat character depends on there being no development. Here the character is already in possession of the truth, and they use that truth to bring about change in the world around them. Think no farther than our good friend Sonic the Hedgehog. He embodies a flat character arc, and I would argue that the strength of his character is predicated on this lack of development. A clearer example of how evaluation is subjective is in the relation between enjoyment and a series. For example, while I find myself delighted every time I watch Naruto, there is nothing necessary about the experience of Naruto that would produce enjoyment. Rather, this is a connection established within me, the subject. This is evident by the fact that there are many people who experience Naruto and simply find it boring. Now, I want to take a moment to step back and briefly touch on the concept of value. As the name evaluation suggests, what we are doing is making a judgment about an anime's value. The most basic forms of value, at least with regards to aesthetic judgments, are good and bad. A good anime is one in which we connect the anime in our minds with our value good, whereas a bad anime is one in which we connect the anime with our value bad. What is important to note here is that these values are inherently subjective, You will not find goodness or badness in the world itself. So while I think Naruto is good, there is not one frame nor one panel that contains goodness. Instead, what is happening is I am taking some moment and connecting it with my idea of good. This is why we cannot claim that an anime is objectively good or bad, because objectivity implies mind-independent existence, but values have their existence entirely in the mind of a subject. The idea of objective goodness then is totally incoherent. So while evaluation is based on something objective, that is, the sense data of the anime, how we value that data is entirely subjective. With this outline of subjectivity, objectivity, and evaluation, I want to address a few questions and concerns that are common in these discussions. First,
well, if everything is subjective, why should we discuss anime? After all, if it's all our subjective opinion, then no one can be right, so discussion is pointless.
Although our evaluation of an anime is subjective, there is still plenty of room to discuss our interpretations of those anime. These interpretations can be more or less grounded in textual evidence, and multiple people may have multiple opinions on the same text. Discussion then allows us to see things from other perspectives, which could alter how we think about the anime, and incidentally, alter our individual evaluation. For example, while I might have a more straightforward opinion of Jujutsu Kaisen, Broken Ronin will make a video with some super in-depth analysis that I would have never have thought. This gives me a new perspective on the same material, a newfound admiration for JJK, which causes me to have a different evaluation of the series. Second,
how can discussion be possible if we all have our own ideas of what is good and what is bad?
While it's conceivable that we could all have radically distinct notions of goodness, such that me saying Naruto's good means nothing to you, this is not a problem. This is because in any situation, simply asserting which anime we think are good is meaningless unless we explain why. I liked how this particular theme was executed here, I like how this character developed over the course of this arc, etc. The explanation does not need to be robust, but at minimum we need to point to something concrete as the ground of our evaluation. I enjoyed this anime when X, Y, and Z happened. Without this context, simply saying I think X is good is meaningless. However, once we have enough of these conversations, we will quickly realize that while there are meaningful differences with how each of us conceive of good, they are not so radically distinct that it is like speaking two different languages. It's perhaps more akin to speaking the same language with different dialects. Third,
if a bunch of subjects think that the same criteria is good, doesn't that just make it objectively good?
Absolutely not. Again, objectivity refers to those things that exist independent of the mind, and goodness will never fit this description. Even in the case where everyone in the universe believes some criterion to be good, this would still not be objective. Rather, what you would have is an intersubjective consensus. By intersubjective, I mean something that exists between subjects or minds. And by consensus, I mean the majority agreement of those subjects. Having said that, this intersubjective consensus does yield something useful for evaluation. They give us conventions, which are those criteria that a majority of a community associate with goodness. These conventions are useful tools for having conversations about anime with others, as they function as a common reference point that has a more stable definition readily available to everyone in the community. So while these are not objective, they nonetheless represent a kind of agreement amongst a group of subjects. Although I could spend a lot more time discussing the nature of good and bad, and there is certainly a lot more I'd like to say about evaluation in the future, this is enough to establish the meaning of subjectivity, objectivity, and how evaluation fits into this. So, in short, subjectivity refers to those things that only exist in the mind, objectivity refers to those things that can exist independent of the mind, and while evaluation begins with objective sense data, the values we ascribe to that data is entirely subjective. My name is Doofy, and until next time, peace and love.